I published a new book in October called Almost Doing Good. And basically, what it did was position organizational leaders to be able to answer the same quote unquote individual questions that my first book, Good Enough Now, challenged us to answer about who and how we want to be in the world. If we're going to give human rights to organizations, I'm going to call your bluff because then we haven't even given human rights equally to humans. So your organization should have a voice of its own and be able to answer who is it? What does it believe in? Why is it doing what it's doing? And I encourage organizations I work with, usually as a consultant, I encourage them to stick a flag in the ground. And when you stick a flag in the ground, you know what you stand for, you know why you're there. You can use that to figure out what your responses are going to be. You're far more prepared for crises. And then the real weak link, and we talked about this last couple webinars, is around uncertainty, because recognizing a problem that you don't experience is really hard because you don't experience it. But if we can learn to recognize problems can exist even if we don't experience them, then that helps with that uncertainty and the fear and leans more into curiosity. So if what if it happens were to actually happen, what would that mean and what would that look like for my clients in crisis, out of crisis? Sometimes I call this thing a reflective crisis because they're not in crisis, but somebody they're watching is, whether it's a benchmark organization, somebody they just don't want it, they don't want that to happen to them, or they're kind of maybe preemptively trying not to be in crisis. So when I started calling the program What If It Happens, I started using this language pre-election. So we are into the middle of 2024 when I started presenting programs called What If It Happens to address people's fears and worries, but also there was some excitement. It's probably hard today to think about, remember when we were excited about like, wow, what if it happens? And for some of us, it did happen. And for others of us, it didn't happen. And now we have new fears and new anxieties that are clearly happening. And things that I know that I have said out loud, like, well, at least this isn't happening, could be happening because every single day is some catastrophic level giant thing that I don't know how anybody would have the time to follow it all the way down its rabbit hole into what is the next what if it happens. So, what I would like to do today, and thank you again for being here as kind of witness. I am totally open to feedback as well. You are welcome to text message me any feedback, thoughts, comments, ideas, questions that you may have. If you're watching the recording, you are also welcome to text message me as well. Texting number works whole time. 202-670-4262. And what I want to do is break down where are we, because what if it happens is now outdated. It's happening. So what are we going to do? Right? What are we collectively doing? What are we individually doing? So if you have any questions, text message 202-670-4262. Now, in my previous keynotes, this model is what most people take pictures of. So if you want to take a screenshot, feel free. But when we start talking about bridging gaps or talking across difference or making better connections, I have this model that is a lot of work. It's simple, but it is a lot of work. And the idea is basically with the intention of making a better connection, can we listen to others as if they are wise? Some of us immediately invoke the people where the answer is no, nah, uh-uh. But at least you're like getting conscious of what you might have been unconscious of when that is a hard no. Your justification and reasoning for that hard no is yours. For some, that might be self-care. For some, it might be boundaries, thinking about like your parents or your family or coworkers or when you feel safe or unsafe. I'm going to invite you. Some of those circumstances, it's not about safety, it's about comfort. So then when you are willing to be uncomfortable, but you are largely safe, can we continue bridging these differences and be able to kind of bridge that gap through better connection? So, first thing you do is you listen to them because they know what's going on in their life, very similarly that you would hope as they are bridging a gap to you that they don't know everything going on in your life, right? They know something about their life that you do not know. Then you can consciously begin to pay attention to what is your intended message and how are you forming that message. This is the part that usually makes people very upset. Once you can be 100% responsible for that intention in how you have chosen to form that message, when you register 100% responsible, you're going to be far less defensive if something comes back at you. And if something does come back at you, then you can claim responsibility for whatever impact occurred that might have been unintended. It is at that point that you can then make the conversation meaningful. And I don't mean this was a meaningful conversation. Thank you so much, Jim. What I mean is that when Jim is no longer in the picture, what meaning am I going to have about this interaction? Are we better? Are we worse? Are we neutral? How am I making this conversation, this connection meaningful to me? And then can I recognize that impact, positive, neutral, or negative? Doesn't even mean I'm right, but can I practice making that meaning and then recognizing the impact of the meaning of this connection, opportunity I had with another human being? And then, like shampoo, rinse, wash, repeat. When we can do this, we are able to make better connections. But I do not think that we can do this 100% of the time. I do not think we can do this 7 days a week. I do not think that there are every subject, every person, every context, every situation. This is realistic. I do think some people, some topics, sometimes this is actually a really great idea. So remember, my mantra is to do the best you can with what you've got some of the time, because it's better than nothing never. And most of us, if we're being really honest, we just straight up opt out or engage in a really unconscious, not thoughtful way. So those are the two levers that I'm going to suggest us do. Now, I don't know about you, but last couple of months, all I have heard is reasons why this is a much bigger ask than it has been in a while. Frankly, I don't know that it is a bigger ask. I would actually say that we're tired. I don't know that a lot of us recovered from COVID yet. For some of us, I mean the actual illness. For others, I mean the time or the stress that took. Um, I don't know what's being triggered in people, what kind of PTSD is showing up for people. I know that in my own therapy sessions, I am now having regular conversations about complex post-traumatic stress disorders and how that's showing up in my life. So, if this is the answer, I'm using air quotes there because I wouldn't come to me for the answer. This is a answer. Sounds similar, but very different. But let's go with people feel more anxious. Or maybe, let's back up. Let's just say people feel anxious. I think that is something most of us can probably agree on, which right now is pretty exciting that we could agree on anything, right? So you can't be curious and anxious at the same time. So how do we switch from that anxiety into a place of curiosity occasionally, sometimes, every once in a while? What if that were to happen? You see what I did there? Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so this is based on my research. This is based on my book, but this is mostly based on conversations that I'm having with people who are self-identified as at the end of their rope or desperately trying to figure out how to reconnect with people that they have lost contact with well over 5 years ago and are trying to figure out how to bring this full circle back to people that they have very much polarized themselves against. Where does one start? So come with me on a little journey. So, first off, I think we need to have a conversation about shareholders and stakeholders. Now, these are both economic terms that Milton Friedman created. And if you want to get really, really, really exciting, multiple decades later, another person named Freeman, except different, came up with the idea of stakeholder. So let's focus first on shareholders. Economically speaking, shareholders are people who usually finance money into a public organization and expect their money or the value of their money to increase. Their return on investment is supposed to increase with dividends, usually at the end of each fiscal year. A shareholder often is in the top priorities of any public organization to make their shareholders happy. According to Milton Friedman, this is the only point of responsibility of an organization, is to make your shareholders happy. Now, how this shows up, and just in case you're interested, because I get forwarded articles all the time about organizations dumping diversity initiatives, adding diversity, doubling down on diversity. We've been doing this since the 20s, and probably since before then, I just stopped digging. The articles about what kind of diversity work needs to be in an organization, at the root of it is, are you satisfying your shareholders? Now, what's interesting is we have seen just recently examples of many different organizations tossing it back to their shareholders and the shareholders voting, yes, we want to keep diversity. So they're satisfying their shareholders because the shareholders were able to kind of displace the responsibility of leadership of the organization to be able to decide that diversity issues matter. Or the shareholders were like, no, I want to make money and diversity is not a profitable thing. That is a whole nother workshop, because of course it is. But in this workshop, some shareholders were like, nah, nope, it was all performative to begin with. We want to turn a profit. We want to increase our dividends. If you can understand shareholder in that economic organizational way, what I'm going to ask you to do is to go with me a little bit. And I want you to think about the people in their lives, in your life, where their definition of responsibility, their agency, their sense of agency is smaller than yours. It's not wrong. It's just smaller. I do not have children. You're welcome. But I have a number of friends who are completely rational, normal human beings who have children. And when something happens to their child, their scope of responsibility gets outrageously small, like the telescope flips and they are looking at it through the other end. And this mama bear thing, I watched you puke in a mailbox once. Where is this coming from? Because I cannot relate. But as their scope shifts and they are so focused on what is happening to their family and their children, some out here might say to the expense of other people. I just want to name that we are all capable of being a shareholder. We're all capable of our agency and our responsibility shifting to what might appear smaller and be about our own individual gain and protecting our own individual dividends. Can we wrap our brains around that? Okay, fantastic. Good starting place. Because if we were to start at stakeholders, which again, 30 years later, another Freeman came up with, the idea of stakeholders from an organizational point of view is you are looking at an entire supply chain from when you, if I were to think about a Post-it note, this Post-it note at one point in time was a tree, right? Like if we follow it all the way back. So that little tree, if we follow it all the way back, at some point it was a little sapling. So to go from the sapling to the tree to the lumber yard to the cutters to the dyers to the people who turned it into a pink square through the adhesive place, right? Because it's got the adhesive bits on it. Then they got stacked, then they got wrapped, then they got shipped, then they got put on a shelf, and then they got scanned, and then I picked it up, and then I put it in a cart, and then I bought it, and then I took it home, and I wrote something important on it until the sticky runs off, and then I'll write something important on a new sticky, right? And then when I'm done with the activity, I will recycle it like I just did. And then on Sunday nights, I will then take that out to the curb. Monday mornings, it gets taken, quote, away to some other place that I largely don't ever have to see until it slowly decomposes, depending on what kind of sack it's in, until maybe, possibly, it returns back to the earth and possibly feeds some germinated seed that got pollinated in the air, probably not by a bee at this point, and eventually becomes a sapling again. Right? The story and the life of a Post-it note. When you start thinking about stakeholders, you're actually thinking about the humans and the community and the environment and the animals and the plants from beginning to end of the widget that your organization makes. So your responsibility to shareholders is included here because shareholders support the public offerings of your business. They are literally financially invested in the future of your organization. But your scope of responsibility and agency is much larger than just that financial investment and support. So I can think of a lot of times where my sense of scope is in the what I would call the wrong end of a telescope. It's very much about my own interests. And there are other times where I flip it around and all of a sudden it is about things and people that I will never, ever, ever meet or know. I remember once I used to do this talk on sustainability, and I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I roughly calculated how many cigarette butts I smoked. I was a very heavy smoker and I smoked for a long time. How many cigarette butts exist on planet Earth? Whether I put them in an ashtray or didn't, how many cigarette butts exist on Earth that are currently decomposing because I was smoking? I took that number and I just thought about my own individual contribution to cigarette butts that take a very long time to decompose, right? That's what I mean by taking responsibility of like the whole big thing. Some of us are wired to look through that end of the telescope first. So when something happens, we immediately go, oh my gosh, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And it gets really, really large. And I'm inviting us to notice one, when are we paying attention to our quote shareholder view? And when are we paying attention, quote, to our stakeholder view? And chances are the people that we are really struggling to have a better connection with are just looking through the same telescope, but the other end. And if we are going to try to make some kind of connection, then it might start by looking through the same end of the telescope as them instead of having a telescope between the two of you, because that's not helpful, right? So I just want us to first ground ourselves and what is our definition of responsibility? What are we doing with our agency inside of that definition? And when you change contexts, are you coming at it from a full view? Or are you coming from a very small view that is very specific to you? There's no judgment there. Both exist. But most of our conflict and polarization, I think, is because we have a telescope pondering between the two of us. So let's like swallow that pill first. Good? Gulp. Let's do it. Let's take a dip. Gulp. Okay. Am I a stakeholder or a shareholder today? Now we need to wrap our brains around this other corporate situation where I don't know to blame math or capitalism. I'm much more used to blaming capitalism on these like linear spectrums, right? So let's say that we are conscious that we can do a worse job or we could do a better job. Notice these are not perfect because I don't do anything in perfects other than hold standards for myself. Okay, so worse to better. If this is a linear model, worse and better are very far away from each other. They're the opposite ends of the spectrum. Somewhere in between is like almost getting there, right? Maybe it's good enough. Maybe it's so close. Maybe it was so close. Maybe like you're kind of scared. Maybe it really is getting worse than you even imagined. And what I'm going to invite us to do is to take this linear model and I want you to make it a circle instead of a line. And when you do this, what's amazing to me is that worse and better are right next to each other. And the difference between being better or being worse are one eyelash away from each other. But it's the work and the effort between the two that fills in the rest of the circle where we spend most of our time trying to get to doing somehow better, maybe almost until we're pretty much doing good. That is a much more realistic way of thinking about our efforts and their efforts. Instead of it being our and or us and them, can we look at the effort that is being made and how doing something better and doing something worse can actually be the exact same activity? Now, there's a lot of things in the news right now, and what makes these conversations complicated is that I agree with a lot of things that are happening, except they're happening in a way that suddenly goes from making something better to making something worse. And I'm so worried about what is worse that I forgot that I agreed with some of this to begin with. Right? When I did the Project 2025 project and we did all the different chapters, I don't know anybody who doesn't think the Department of Education needs to be overhauled. But I also don't know very many people who think the Department of Education should be like systematically dismantled and turned over to private business. What I like, you had me until you lost me. So again, if we're trying to have conversations with people that we already know are being set up to be very polarizing or we're very anxious about them, can we take a moment, notice what side of the telescope we're on, and remember some of the things? I don't want to minimize the worstness, but by focusing only on the worstness, we have forgotten the better that we agreed on to begin with. There are things inside of Project 2025 I agree with. I actually love the language. An example, it says in the Department of Health and Human Services chapter that miscarriage and ectopic pregnancies should never be conflated with abortion care. Well, that'd be great because those are the two things that are killing the most women right now. But we weren't paying attention. And so then we, like, with the people who are banning women's health care aren't paying attention to the dogma that they're actually supposed to be following. Don't do that, right? Like, how powerful would it be to, I agree with the Heritage Foundation that ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages should not be conflated with abortion health care. Like, just saying that makes it feel like my head's going to explode because it's hard for me to say that I agree with the Heritage Foundation. Last week, I agreed with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rand Paul, and Tucker Carlson in the same 4-hour period, right? It is not on my bingo card that I'm going to have to mail something to Liz Cheney and say thank you for your patriotism. What is happening? But it is up to me to find those places, right? So we're like, oh, okay, got it. Yeah, sure. What is it? The difference here is that we have some identity issues that we need to take responsibility for, because at the root of it, we need to be talking about what our values are. Now, I'm using a lot of individual examples, but remember, this is about your organization. I don't think most organizations are willing to put a flag in the ground and say, this is absolutely what we stand for. Because at some point in time, they're going to have to question, do we want to include all of this in this? I think about LGBT organizations right now who are really trying to distance themselves for trans or non-binary inclusion, as if they're going to like take the bus so that gays and lesbians don't lose things and then come back around for trans and non-binary piece. Notice leaving bi, omni, pan people completely out again. But that's a place of privilege, right? Is that when we started legalizing adoption and military service and marriage, it was because monosexual, lesbian, and gay people, those were the three things they couldn't do. So bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, trans folks, non-binary folks, they were left out of that conversation. Now those rights are being threatened to be taken away, if they're not already be taken away, at the expense of the weakest members of our community. So LGBT organizations are really having to pay attention because the flag in the ground looks good, but they can't get caught being performative because they've been accusing all these other organizations of being performative. Whoops. So maybe if you can't put a flag in the ground, maybe second best is building out a fence. And who are you leaving outside of that fence and who are you leaving inside that fence? And I think this is a really great activity for us as individuals. And if we're giving human rights to organizations, then organizations should have their own voices. And what is the mission and vision of this organization? What's inside the fence? And maybe someday we're going to be bold enough to plant a flag and say, this is why this organization exists. What I love about working with fast growing companies is founders usually agree on this, but the company grows, the organization grows, and it grows out of that little sapling that turned into a post-it note. And the post-it note looks at a sapling and they need to be able to remember that they're connected somehow. But instead, it's like, what are you doing here? If a post-it note was that close to a sapling, we would be more likely to call it litter than we would actually see the entire chain of how they're connected. We can slow down enough and take responsibility for that, but we would have to know our mission and vision. For a lot of us, we have t-shirts and murals that tell us this information, but we don't actually see what's happening on the ground. And on the ground are our policies and our habits. And when we can understand how we respond to crises or not crises, what are our procedures? What do we do? What's written down and what's lived inside of the organization? How do we actually respond to things? Usually more policies get written in response to something that occurred that didn't have a policy about it. So we're constantly updating these things. We're, in theory, reviewing them, and we're making sure that they're actually representative of how our organization or individually we are actually living our lives. This is called self-reflection. It allows an opportunity for an organization to learn something, to make a choice and change and be like, I didn't know that I'd need a stance on this, but here I am. I remember when George Floyd was murdered, my phone blew up because people needed a George Floyd statement for their websites. Okay, so then I said, what is your stance on racial justice in the United States? And they're like, oh, we don't have one of those. We just need like a sentence for like the front of the website. And I was like, okay, well, how about a sentence that says, we don't have a stance on racial justice? That's a sentence. Oh, yeah, but we can't tell anybody that. Oh, okay, great. So what policies or what habits or what activities is your organization doing that is supporting an anti-racial, anti-racist movement or work? Like, how are you fighting anti-race? Like, what are you doing? We don't really know. Okay, how about this sentence? We don't really know, but we feel peer pressure to put a sentence on our website. As dumb as it sounds, you might remember there was a wave of the non-statement statements where people would say, we don't have a statement, but we're really thinking about it. That is a situation that is laughable and a pattern I see pretty regularly. You didn't know that you needed a statement for your website because I don't know that Dyson vacuum cleaners is who I think of first when I think about anti-racism work or racial justice work in the United States. No offense to Dyson, I just don't know that that's the first organization I think of. What policies, what habits, what actions is your organization actively taking? And if you need to apply this individually, bonus, but what are you doing that is in alignment with your mission and values? And then is that alignment congruent or incongruent with whatever side of the telescope you're on? If we can start taking responsibility for the jigs and jags here, because there is a lot of misalignment, if we can do that, it is then that we can actually figure out how to move forward. Except we don't have any control over that. We don't know how to do that. We don't know. Like, I'm sure you've heard those noises. The certainty that uncertainty exists and the ability for you to grasp that you are out of control to prevent uncertainty is in your control. If you can decide what side of the telescope you're on, what you actually value and believe, and how your organization is performing in line, occasionally, maybe every once in a while, with what you say you actually believe, then you can be certain that you're going to have to constantly reevaluate this, because what you're projecting to your stakeholders or your shareholders is within your control. Now, I put a bit.ly link here just so that it's short and a little bit easier for y'all to go and type to, but this is the quick link to the newest white paper that I wrote that updated the uncertainty research that I did at the beginning of COVID. Then I did it again when these non-statement statements started coming out after George Floyd's murder. And then I did it a third time just recently to test, where is this source of fear of uncertainty that is directly related to the lack of feeling of control in your personal and professional life. So you're welcome to download the white paper there if you're interested. But instead of ceding control or needing the control, why don't we just get comfortable that uncertainty is pretty much a given? The irony is that when I was getting my MBA inside COVID, largely because I was afraid of breaking sobriety, corporations take risks all the time. We make financial decisions based on forecasting, hoping that dividends and the return on investment increases, but there's no guarantee that it will. You shareholders get to dictate what level of risk they're willing to take, and they're taking a risk by investing resources that they may or may not even have in your public organization. Don't tell me that you can't handle uncertainty if you're focusing on dividends, because that was the whole point in the first place. And for stakeholders, those of us that tend to like grasp a much broader, more complicated place, there is a lot of stuff that can happen along a supply chain, right? Like when COVID hit and people started buying toilet paper, I remember thinking, is this a digestive related illness? But it was the supply chain being disrupted that I hadn't really thought about. We can do this. We do this all the time. It's a very convenient excuse to not acknowledge the misalignment between our actions and our values. And all we have to do is straighten that up and recognize that the person that we might be engaging in a conversation with either has done a better job than us or needs to do it too. And if they need to do it too, what a great way to build some community. Now, with this stated, people like answers. So I'm here with as close to answers as I can give you. In Almost Doing Good, I break down the fraud triangle, actually, which is something else I learned in my MBA program, for doing good instead of doing bad. The idea of the fraud triangle was to be able to, some interviews were done of white collar criminals who committed fraud, who admitted guilt, to find out why did they do it. And it was so disruptive to the norm inside of the organization that it was baffling to people that they would have committed fraud to begin with, because they felt pressured, they had the opportunity, right? They're doing fraud. So then I went down some rabbit hole about whistleblowers. What was interesting to me about whistleblowers is whistleblowers also feel an internal or external sense of pressure. They also have to have opportunity, and they have to have some kind of access or reasoning, right? Like, but whistleblowing seems to be disruption for good if committing fraud is disruption for bad. Okay, well, then how could any organization intentionally disrupt for good and extra whammy points have it rooted in their organization's mission and values, show up in their policies and their habits so that they can make better choices when they feel out of control or in uncertainty? Can that occur? And I decided it sure can. It is a three-seated bicycle. Now, I don't know if you've ever been on one of these beasts. They're really heavy. But the idea is you could at some point stop pedaling because you got two other people pedaling, but then you're going to get shin burns when you try to put your feet back down. So all three people really need to pedal at the same time. And that's what actually leads you forward into momentum. So if all three are going at the same time, that is not a linear model, right? We're back to circles. And what I want to encourage us to do is to think about preparation, recognition, and our response versus reaction at exactly the same time. So this is not a 1, 2, 3. This is a three at the same time, pointed in the same direction because of our mission and values. We're in alignment. When we start thinking about that preparation, we're going to be able to like think about what we have, what resources we have access to. Are we shareholders or stakeholders? What do we believe in? Do we need to reassess that? Where on our stakeholder or supply chain could there be a breakdown? We can role play. This is where case studies come in. My book has like 50 different case studies in it of my clients' well-intentioned failures. Then we can take that information and instead of reacting in some kind of like comfortable, habitual way that probably is going to cause way more harm than an actual intentional response. That response can also be rooted in our mission and our vision and recognize whether or not we're paying attention to shareholders or stakeholders. Individually, we need to know why we are doing what we are doing when we are responding versus reacting. Are we doing this for our small circle or are we doing this for the broad scope of things? Is it in alignment with who and how we want to be in the world? Is this a knee-jerk instinct because we feel out of control? Those things are within our power because we are either going to be in alignment or we are going to be out of alignment. I'm going to ask us to focus on building that muscle of recognizing a problem that you may not even experience, but it might be connected to your own mission. It might be connected to your own values. It might actually be able to dictate what kind of policies or habits you're going to do or not do. Preparation, recognition, and response instead of reactions are how we are going to be able to have new and innovative ideas. The only thing certain is uncertain. The uncertainty is going to happen. You are in control of the level of comfort you are bringing to the next unexpected thing. So if we can disrupt the idea that we're trying to flatten things out, and we can actually get comfortable with there's a lot of things that are out of our control. It is at that point that we can normalize complexity instead of decorate it. One of the first things I do with my consulting clients is I ask for their annual report, and I ask for it for 5 years. It usually takes them a very, very long time to find 5 copies of it because no one read it 5, 4, 3, 2, or this year. So then they give it to me and I score it based on duplicative photographs, copy, same paragraph, same day, just different year, right? These are marketing pieces showcasing to the shareholders how satisfied they should be with whatever their dividends are. And I'm going to put this out on an individual level, and that this is our t-shirts, this is our bumper stickers. These are all the virtue signals that we send out to people so that people know we're a good one. We're one of them. Currently, my hair is green, just in case anyone's not looking at the video. I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, my hair does look good, but this particular situation, I am getting stopped constantly with people asking me about my hair. My hair has been non-human colors for a very long time. I'm I don't know why this is the one, but I also know that maybe it's because I'm not traveling that much. So maybe it feels like I'm being stopped a lot because I'm actually not being stopped a lot because I don't actually get to leave my office as much, right? Like maybe it's a me thing and not a thing out there. Can we begin to focus on our own marketing, our own virtue signaling, instead of keeping track of other people's dog whistles? Can we disrupt our own behaviors when we begin to do something that is incongruent with who we say we are, who we say we're focusing on, how we want to be in the world? And can we just acknowledge that it is really complicated? It's not just simple, but we can normalize our sense of agita that complexity and uncertainty bring us, because that is actually inside of our control. If we can recognize that it is not this linear model and that things don't just grow and get better and that there's new bugs and things like this. I use the example in both of my books when we're talking about technology or cars or apps. Those get released knowing they have bugs. But is it a bug that's going to interfere with a user experience, or are we just being super thorough? And then users start using it and they're like, oh, I don't like this thing. And that was not a bug that had been previously identified. So then I don't know if any of you ever wake up early enough in the morning and you look down at your phone and there's pinwheels all over your little folders because your apps are updating. We're not entitled for an app update to occur to us. We manually have to update our own app. We need to be able to pay attention and be aware that we have responsibility. What end of the telescope are we talking to? What assumptions are we making? Is this rooted in our mission and vision? How is this actually showing up in our behaviors? If we can track what is congruent or incongruent, do we need to change, or do we need to keep what is currently registering as an incongruence because our mission and vision is changing? Is there something that we need to take into consideration that we hadn't previously been taking into consideration? And we need to update our apps and evolve and change. Do we need to regress? Do we need to go back to something? I was just talking with my web developer today. Hi, Phil. And one of the things that we were talking about was this blog post series that I did a number of years ago. And we both said, well, I mean, that was like a completely different time. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, is it really that different of a time? Why don't I go look at these blog posts? I bet I can just update them. Right? I did a survey recently where people gave me feedback on working with me. And my newsletter, I have a monthly newsletter, you're welcome to subscribe, is called Another Isolated Incident. And one of the people responded that the first time they saw me was 2007. 2007 was when they saw me speak. I'm old. And they were feeling very disheartened with the world. We were invading the Middle East for kind of no apparent reason. They felt very out of control. They were very worried about militarism around the world. They're very worried about the economy. They were worried about basic survival skills. They're worried about their relationship with their mother, who had voted for the other political party. And now here we are, 2025. Welcome back to another isolated incident. I'm encouraging us not to start ironing and smoothing things out, but to recognize these wrinkles are living. They're impacting our ability to make connections to one another. And I can't make other people do things differently, but I can certainly pay attention to when I could potentially do something different. So that brings us to soup. When I was writing my book, in the last portion of my book, I was trying to think of like a good story, right? Like I like to think of myself as a storyteller. And so I was drifting back, and I remember one point in time, my grandfather and I were out driving tractors. He lived on a big deer lease in central Texas. And at some point in time, we took a break, probably to have some iced tea and smoke on the fence. I was probably 10. We're both smoking, drinking our teas, etc. And my grandfather was known for his stories, his fables. And frankly, they always had a lesson, and you really didn't know what it was until you knew what it was. So, this particular one that struck me when I was just writing this newest book is about a group of travelers. And the travelers are exhausted. They're tired, they're weathered. It's in their bones that they have been traveling as long and hard and fighting and long and hard as they have. And someone takes them in. They walk inside and they can smell food and they're finally warm. They sit down at this very long table and they are given bowls of soup, piping hot, luscious bowls of soup. And they're looking for this nourishment. They're so excited. But the bowls are so hot and heavy that they can't pick up the bowls. And the spoons that they were given were really heavy and very, very long. And they just didn't work with you couldn't even pick up a spoon yourself. Maybe they were too weak, but just the physics wasn't right. This is not the right spoon. And they started getting more frustrated and more angry, and they were so annoyed because nourishment was right there, but they couldn't access it. And then finally, somebody at the table said, if you and I work together, we can pick up the spoon and feed that person across the table. Remember, this is a grandpa story while we're smoking a Camel. But it hit me that so much of my work is focused on my approach and who I feel responsible for, which are largely stakeholders, which include shareholders. I'm so at service to make sure that someone else is taken care of that I often do that at my own expense. And I'm going to invite us to think about, are you paying attention to your bowl or are you paying attention to your spoon? I know there's that mental health thing about whether you have spoons or you don't have spoons. But if you're paying attention to spoons, it's the tool that helps feed somebody else. It takes the nourishment that's available and supports other people. And this is a Buddhist concept, right? Is that if you're lonely, you find someone else who's lonely and you help them not feel lonely. And as your reward, you are no longer alone. If you're focusing on your spoon, you are nourishing other people with the tools that you do actually have at the ready. And there are other times where I'm probably really focusing on my own nourishment. I'm focusing on my bowl and my soup that I want in my mouth, and I can't do it with the tools that I have. That's real. Burnout is real. Exhaustion is real. And if I'm on that end of the telescope, I need someone to help me because I can't do it by myself. And I need to be able to look across the table and accept the incoming spoon. that someone else is going to help me. When this clicked with me, why this was so powerful is that when I speak earlier about being on the right and wrong side of a telescope, there's a judgment implied there that is not implied when I have both a spoon and a bowl, but I can shift between the two based on my area of focus, my needs, my ego. And can I have the humility to accept help and the strength to help somebody else? My grandfather has been gone for a very, very long time, and I invite the joy of his parables at this time, because what if it could happen that I could catch myself staring at my own bowl, wishing I had access to my own nourishment, and noticing just to the left, I have a tool that can help somebody else. There are other times where I am certain I enter all spoon. I am here to help everybody else. I'll grab my nourishment later. I know I'm that type of person, but I am definitely the other type as well. And we need to take care of ourselves. We need to notice when we need rest, when we need nourishment, when we are burnt out, when we are exhausted, when we can't do this. Because that is when we're also going to notice when we can. If we can begin to understand whether we are staring at our spoons or staring at our bowls, we can enter with some curiosity and some compassion. Because when we're talking to somebody else who's doing the other, they need us. If they need us, that could trigger my people-pleasing stuff. And when I need somebody else, that could trigger my own sense of vulnerability. We're talking about curiosity and generosity. And I don't know anything that's going to work better right now than when we can authentically tap into each other's vulnerabilities, share generosity, and encourage curiosity across what we would like to think is uncertain times. That is the biggest disruption I can think of. Because what if it happens is already too late to ask. I bring this to you because I think it's a lesson that we all need to be really, really focusing on. But selfishly, it's my own nourishment too. This is a time right now. This is a time, right? Less than 24 hours ago, I was standing on a street that seemed quiet, suddenly became very loud. I was surrounded by anti-war protesters, police officers, and riot gear. And my response was to count the number of paddy wagons that were parked a block away that I walked towards because I needed to catch a lift to go to a WNBA game. We won. That is a very complicated little hour I just described. And if I can deal with that level of complication, stimuli, what do I need to be doing? What do I not need to be doing? What do I want to be doing? And what do I don't want to be doing? How am I taking care of myself? How am I taking care of other people? How is this in alignment with who I am as a person? How I behave? What do I believe in? What are my values? At the root of that, I am both able to sit at a WNBA game and enjoy a fabulous hot dog because I also know that I have the resources and tools to support other people while I'm also being nourished. That's disrupting complexity and normalizing uncertainty in a way that we absolutely can do. And ultimately, we can't do it without the people on the other side of the telescope. So thank you very much for attending the new ideas as they're coming together. just in time for me to realize that the new ideas are old ideas and we're back. Maybe this is the spoon soup set that I have to offer, and it might not solve every problem in the whole wide world, but I do feel like I'm doing the best I can with what I've got some of the time, and hopefully encouraging you to do the same. So thank you very much for coming. If you're interested, you're welcome to go to the website. You're welcome to click on the QR code and get a book. You can do whatever you want. I'm super excited. But now it's time for lunch.